Christmas is supposed to be the season of warmth, of family, of light cutting through the longest, darkest nights of the year. But in small towns scattered across America, places where everyone knows your name, where you leave your doors unlocked, where the worst crime is a stolen lawn ornament, there are holiday nights that ended in silence. Nights where someone walked beneath the glow of festive lights and never came home. These aren't folklore. They're not urban legends whispered around campfires. They're real cases, real investigations, real families still waiting for answers. Tonight, we're covering 7 Christmas disappearances that shattered the illusion of safety in towns that believed they were immune to horror. Cases where the evidence contradicted itself, where human behavior defied explanation, where the environments, snow-covered streets, abandoned factories, frozen lakes, swallowed the truth whole. These are the stories that don't make national news. The cases buried in local archives. The investigations that collapsed under the weight of contradictory forensics, social pressure, and the brutal indifference of winter. This is Plain Sight Docs, and this is 7 small-town Christmas horrors that shattered the silence. The Last Carol of Candlemas Creek, December 24th, 2017, Candlemas Creek, Montana. A town of 1,800 souls, nestled in a valley where the Bitterroot Range casts long shadows even at noon. Elevation, 4,200 feet. Average December temperature, 19 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow depth that night, 11 inches and rising. Candlemas Creek is the kind of place travel magazines photograph for their authentic American Christmas spreads. Main Street is lined with century-old storefronts. The bakery still uses a wood-fired oven. The church, St. Augustine's, has held midnight mass every Christmas Eve since 1889. And every year, the town gathers in the central plaza for the annual carol service, beneath a towering Douglas fir strung with white lights donated by the same family for 3 generations. Emily Hayes was 19 years old, a freshman at Montana State University, home for winter break. She had sung in St. Augustine's choir since she was 7. That night, she wore a red wool coat, jeans, and the hand-knit scarf her grandmother had made bright crimson with white snowflakes. The carol service began at 8 p.m. Emily stood in the front row of the choir, her breath visible in the cold air, her voice clear and steady as the group moved through Silent Night, O Holy Night, and hark, the herald angels sing. By 9:30 p.m. the service had concluded. Families began dispersing. Children chased each other around the nativity scene, a life-sized wooden structure depicting Mary, Joseph, and the Christ child, illuminated by strings of warm yellow bulbs. Emily's mother had driven separately to the service and left early to prepare Christmas breakfast for the next morning. Emily told her friends she'd walk home. It was only 4 blocks. She'd made the walk 1,000 times. At 9:45 p.m., Emily sent a text to her mother. Just finished. Walking home. Love you. Her mother replied immediately. See you soon, sweetie. Be safe. Emily never responded. The walk from the plaza to the Hayes family home on Pinewood Lane should have taken no more than 10 minutes. The route was direct. Down Main Street, left on Birch Avenue, right on Maple, and straight to Pinewood. Every street was lined with homes decorated for Christmas. Every sidewalk had been shoveled. Every corner was illuminated by streetlights and the ambient glow of holiday decorations. At 10:05 p.m., Emily's mother called her phone. No answer. She called again at 10:10 p.m., then 10:15 p.m. By 10:20 p.m., she was in her car, retracing Emily's expected route, slowing at every corner, scanning the sidewalks. Nothing. No. At 10:30 p.m., she called the Candlemas Creek Sheriff's Department. Deputy Ryan Coulter arrived at the plaza within minutes. He knew Emily. He had coached her brother in Little League. He walked the route himself, checking behind dumpsters, peering into alleyways, knocking on doors. By 11 p.m., Sheriff Dale McKenzie had mobilized every available officer and volunteer. Search teams fanned out across the town, moving methodically, calling Emily's name, checking unlocked cars, shining flashlights into darkened yards. At 11:47 p.m., Deputy Coulter returned to the plaza. He wanted to do one more sweep of the nativity scene, the last place Emily had been confirmed to be standing. That's when he found it. Emily's scarf. Not torn. Not trampled. Not discarded in haste. Folded. It had been placed deliberately on the wooden floor of the nativity stable, directly beneath the illuminated figure of the Virgin Mary. The fabric was neatly creased, the corners aligned. It sat there like an offering. Deputy Coulter didn't touch it. He called Sheriff Mackenzie immediately. Within the hour, the plaza was cordoned off. Floodlights were erected. A forensic photographer from the county crime scene unit documented the scarf from every angle. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. No torn threads. No disturbance in the snow around the nativity. And here's where the case became impossible. The plaza that night had been heavily trafficked. Dozens of families had walked past the nativity after the carol service. Children had played around it. Adults had posed for photos in front of it. The fresh snowfall, light but consistent, had been falling since 8:00 p.m. By the time the scarf was discovered, the area around the nativity was crisscrossed with overlapping boot prints, sneaker treads, small shoe impressions from children. The forensic team could not isolate a single identifiable path leading to or from the scarf's location. Whoever placed it there had done so in a window of chaos, surrounded by witnesses, in a brightly lit public space, during the most visible night of the year in Candlemas Creek. You're already asking yourself, how is that possible? The investigation moved quickly. Emily's phone records were pulled. Her last outgoing text, sent at 9:45 p.m., pinged off the cell tower covering the downtown plaza. After that, nothing. The phone went dark. But here's the critical detail. Emily's phone was later found in her bedroom, still plugged into the charger on her desk. She had left it behind before the carol service. That single fact eliminated the most common theories in missing person cases. Emily had not used her phone to coordinate a secret meeting. She had not texted a boyfriend, an estranged friend, or anyone suggesting plans to leave. She had not been lured by an online predator. Her phone wasn't even with her. The initial investigative hypothesis leaned toward voluntary disappearance, a theory that infuriates families but statistically accounts for a significant percentage of missing young adults, especially during high-stress periods like the holidays. But the evidence didn't support it. Emily's bank account showed no withdrawals after December 22nd. Her debit card hadn't been used. Her car, a 2009 Honda Civic, was still parked in the driveway at home. Her suitcase sat unopened in her closet. Her laptop, checked by forensic analysts, showed no signs of distress, no searches for bus tickets, no research into disappearing, no goodbye letters saved in drafts. Her social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, was reviewed exhaustively. The tone was normal. Excited about Christmas, looking forward to seeing friends, complaining about finals, planning to binge-watch a Netflix series over break. There was no indication of depression, suicidal ideation, or intent to leave. Emily Hayes was not a runaway. But then, something unexpected surfaced. 3 days after Emily's disappearance, a witness came forward. Margaret Hollis, 72 years old, a retired librarian who lived 2 blocks from the plaza. She had been walking her dog, a small terrier named Buttons, near the nativity around 9:50 p.m. Margaret recalled seeing Emily standing near the nativity, speaking with someone. The investigator conducting the interview leaned forward. "Can you describe the person?" Margaret hesitated. It was dark. They were wearing a heavy coat, dark color. Maybe black, maybe navy. I couldn't see their face clearly. Average height. I honestly couldn't tell you if it was a man or a woman. Everyone was bundled up. How long did the conversation last? Not long, maybe 2 minutes. Emily didn't seem upset. She was just standing there, talking, normal, casual. And then what happened? The person walked away, toward the street, I think. And Emily stayed by the nativity. I assumed she was just admiring it, taking a moment before heading home. I kept walking. Margaret's account was the last confirmed sighting of Emily Hayes. The problem investigators faced was this. The timeline between Margaret's sighting at 9:50 p.m. and Emily's mother's first unanswered call at 10:05 p.m. was 15 minutes. In those 15 minutes, Emily Hayes vanished from one of the most heavily monitored, well-lit, populated areas of Candlemas Creek. There were no reports of screaming, no sounds of struggle, no vehicle idling suspiciously. No one saw her leave the plaza. And yet, her scarf, her distinctive, handmade, unmistakable red scarf, was found folded and placed beneath the nativity lights. The methodical nature of that placement haunted investigators. If Emily had been abducted by force, why would the abductor take the time to fold her scarf and arrange it ceremonially in one of the most visible locations in town? Was it a message? A taunt? A ritual? Or had Emily placed it there herself, willingly, before walking into the night for reasons no one could understand? Sheriff Mackenzie coordinated with the Montana State Police. Search teams deployed canine units trained in tracking and cadaver detection. They combed the forests surrounding Candlemas Creek, the frozen banks of Candlemas Creek itself, the abandoned logging roads that snaked into the mountains. Aerial infrared sweeps were conducted via helicopter, scanning for heat signatures in the wilderness. Nothing. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted. They reviewed the case file and concluded that the evidence suggested either a carefully planned abduction by someone familiar with Emily's routine or a voluntary departure, staged to appear like an abduction. But both theories had flaws. If it was an abduction, the abductor operated with inhuman precision in a near-impossible environment. If it was voluntary, Emily left behind no preparation, no resources, and no clear motive. The case was featured on regional news. Flyers were distributed across Montana, Idaho, and Washington. Emily's face appeared on digital billboards along Interstate 90. Tips poured in. None led anywhere. Months passed. Then a year. The town of Candlemas Creek tried to move forward, but the case left a scar. Every Christmas, the plaza is still decorated. The nativity scene is still erected in the same spot. The carol service still happens on Christmas Eve, but no one talks about the red scarf. Because the truth is, the people of Candlemas Creek don't know what happened to Emily Hayes. They don't know if she walked into the wilderness, consumed by something invisible and internal. They don't know if someone she trusted led her away under the cover of holiday chaos. They don't know if the folded scarf was a goodbye or a warning. And that uncertainty, that unresolved horror, is what haunts them most. Because if Emily Hayes could vanish in 4 minutes, in the brightest, safest moment of the year, surrounded by her community, then no one is truly safe, and nothing is ever truly certain. The Midnight Shift at Factory 52, North Fork, Illinois, 1996. A town built on steel and the promise of industrial prosperity. By the mid-1990s, that promise was long dead. The factories that once employed thousands had closed, one by one, hollowed out by automation, outsourcing, and the brutal economics of Rust Belt decline. North Fork's population had been cut in half. The downtown was a graveyard of boarded storefronts. The high school graduating class that year had 32 students. Factory 52, a sprawling complex of corrugated iron buildings and concrete warehouses, once responsible for manufacturing agricultural machinery, had been shuttered since 1989. The site was maintained by a skeleton security crew contracted through a regional firm. Their job was simple: patrol the perimeter, check the locks, prevent vandalism, and copper theft. The shifts were long, solitary, and uneventful. Robert Mills was 53 years old. He had worked at Factory 52 as a machinist for nearly 20 years before the closure. When the plant shut down, he lost his pension. He took the security job because it was steady work, and because he didn't mind the silence. Robert was a quiet man. Divorced. No children. He lived alone in a small rental house on the edge of town. His hobbies included fishing, reading military history, and fixing old radios. He was reliable, professional, the kind of employee who never called in sick, never complained, and always completed his rounds on schedule. On Christmas night, December 25th, 1996, Robert was assigned the graveyard shift at Factory 52. His shift began at 11:00 p.m. His scheduled radio check-in with the dispatch supervisor was set for 3 a.m. He never made the call. At 4:15 a.m., the dispatch supervisor, a woman named Linda Kowalski, tried to raise Robert on the radio. No response. She tried his personal cell phone. It rang, unanswered. Protocol required her to send another guard to investigate. The nearest available officer was Danny Ruiz, a younger man who usually worked the industrial park on the north side of town. Danny arrived at Factory 52 at 4:40 a.m. Robert's vehicle, a faded blue 1987 Ford F-150 pickup truck, was parked outside the main gate. The engine was off. The keys were in the ignition. The driver's side door was unlocked. The main gate, which should have been locked, was standing open. Danny called out. No answer. He entered the complex and began a systematic sweep, following the route Robert would have taken. The main corridors, the administrative offices, the storage bays. Factory 52 was a maze. Concrete floors, rusted metal catwalks, massive, silent machinery frozen in mid-operation, abandoned the day the plant closed. The air inside was damp, cold, and thick with the smell of oil, mildew, and decay. The only illumination came from Danny's flashlight and the dim emergency lighting that ran on backup generators. The boiler room was located in the basement, accessed by a narrow stairwell at the rear of the main building. That's where Danny found the blood. A large, violent spray pattern covered approximately 8 feet of the concrete wall, adjacent to the industrial boiler. The blood was still wet, fresh. It glistened under Danny's flashlight. The pattern was unmistakable. Arterial spray, consistent with a catastrophic injury to a major blood vessel. Carotid artery, femoral artery, something that would cause rapid exsanguination. Danny immediately radioed dispatch. Within 30 minutes, the North Fork Police Department, the county sheriff, and a forensic team from the Illinois State Police had arrived. The blood was tested on site using a presumptive field kit. It was human. Later, DNA analysis confirmed it belonged to Robert Mills. The quantity of blood suggested a fatal or near-fatal wound. Medical examiners estimated that the spray pattern indicated a loss of at least 2 liters, roughly half of the average adult's total blood volume. If Robert had sustained that injury, he would have been unconscious within seconds and dead within minutes. But Robert's body was not there. Investigators conducted an exhaustive search of the entire Factory 52 complex. They checked every room, every closet, every storage container. They climbed the catwalks. They searched the furnace pits, the drainage systems, the crawl spaces beneath the floors. Cadaver dogs were brought in and tracked through the entire site, from the perimeter fence to the deepest corners of the basement. They found nothing. No body, no drag marks, no secondary blood trails leading away from the boiler room. The dusty concrete floor around the blood spatter showed no disturbance, no footprints, no scuff marks, no signs of a struggle or an attempt to move a body. The door to the boiler room had been standing open. There were no signs of forced entry. The lock was intact. It was as if Robert Mills had bled out in that room and then simply ceased to exist. But then something unexpected surfaced. 50 feet from the boiler room, near a row of disused metal shelving units, investigators found a pair of eyeglasses. The frames were scratched. One lens was cracked, the fracture sharp and fresh. The style was dated, heavy, dark plastic frames, the kind popular in the 1970s. The forensic team photographed and bagged the glasses. They ran the serial number etched into the inside of the frame, a standard identifier used by optometrists. The glasses belonged to a man named Gerald Cummings. Gerald had worked at Factory 52 as a shift foreman from 1972 until March 12, 1994. On that date, he was killed in an industrial accident during an unsanctioned salvage operation. A steel support beam, dislodged during the removal of heavy equipment, fell and crushed him instantly. His death was ruled accidental. He was buried at North Fork Memorial Cemetery. So how did his eyeglasses end up at the scene of Robert Mills' disappearance, 2 years and 9 months after Gerald's death? The initial investigative assumption was contamination. Perhaps the glasses had been left behind during the salvage operation and simply hadn't been noticed until now. But the condition of the lenses contradicted that theory. The crack in the left lens was fresh, sharp-edged, not dulled by years of exposure to dust and moisture. The scratches on the frames were recent, the kind caused by violent contact with a rough surface. And then came the forensic bombshell. Trace evidence analysis detected minute quantities of blood on the frames. The blood matched Robert Mills' DNA. You might wonder how this is possible. The investigative team faced 2 irreconcilable facts. Fact 1. Robert Mills lost a fatal quantity of blood in a sealed boiler room. His body was never recovered. Fact 2. The only physical evidence linking another individual to the scene was a pair of eyeglasses belonging to a man who had been dead for nearly 3 years. The case file grew thicker with contradictions. Robert's psychological profile showed no red flags, no history of depression, no substance abuse, no financial troubles, no conflicts with coworkers or family. He was stable, solitary, and methodical. There was no motive for self-harm, no reason to stage his own disappearance. But there was also no rational explanation for how a dead man's eyeglasses ended up covered in his blood. The lead investigator, a state police detective named Marcus Hale, later gave an interview to a true crime podcast in 2004. He disclosed a detail that had been kept out of the public record. Factory 52's security logs showed that Robert Mills had been assigned to patrol the site on 17 previous occasions over the past 2 years. On 14 of those shifts, Robert had filed incident reports. The reports were brief, almost identical. Heard sounds, metallic clanging, footsteps on catwalks, doors closing. No identifiable source. Investigated. Found nothing. The logs also showed that Robert had requested, twice, to be reassigned to a different site. Both requests were denied due to holiday staffing shortages. The final radio transmission Robert made was recorded at 2:47 a.m., 13 minutes before his scheduled 3 a.m. check-in. The audio was later reviewed by investigators and played during Detective Hale's podcast interview. Robert's voice was calm, steady, professional. He said, "Dispatch, this is Mills, checking the basement level. Hearing the usual, will advise." And that was the last time anyone heard Robert Mills' voice. The phrase "the usual" haunted investigators. What did Robert mean? Was he referring to the unexplained sounds he had reported on previous shifts? Had he become so accustomed to hearing them that they no longer alarmed him? Or had something in Factory 52, something Robert encountered repeatedly but could never identify, finally reached out and claimed him? The case went cold within 6 months. Without a body, without a suspect, without a clear cause of death, there was nothing to prosecute. Factory 52 was demolished in 2003. The site is now an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and littered with fragments of concrete and rusted metal. The case of Robert Mills remains officially unsolved, but the forensic triangle that defined it has never been reconciled. A fatal quantity of blood, a missing body, and a dead man's eyeglasses, cracked and covered in fresh blood, lying 50 feet away. Detective Hale, in his final statement on the podcast, said this: "I've worked homicides for 23 years. I've seen staged crime scenes. I've seen bodies hidden in places you wouldn't believe. But Factory 52, that one defies everything. Either someone orchestrated the most elaborate disappearance I've ever encountered, or something happened in that building that we don't have the language to explain." The town of North Fork has largely moved on. The factory is gone. Most of the people who worked there are dead or relocated. But on cold December nights, when the wind cuts through the empty lot where Factory 52 once stood, locals still avoid the area. Not because they believe in ghosts, but because they know that sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones rooted in blood, forensics, and the impossibility of a man vanishing from a locked room while leaving behind only the evidence of his own violent end. And no one, No investigator, no forensic expert, no rational mind has ever explained what Robert Mills meant when he said, calmly, into the radio, hearing the usual. The snowbound cabin on Lookout Pass. The Cascade Mountains. December 2008. Lookout Pass sits at an elevation of 5,800 feet, deep in the wilderness outside the small logging town of Alimuum, Washington. The pass is accessible only by a single-lane Forest Service road that winds through dense stands of Douglas fir and western hemlock for 11 miles before dead-ending at a small clearing. For 6 months of the year, roughly November through April, the road becomes impassable. Snow accumulates in drifts that can reach 10, 15, even 20 feet in the deeper sections. The pass is effectively cut off from civilization. Elias Thorne, known to the few people who remembered him as Eli, had lived in a small, hand-built cabin on Lookout Pass for nearly 15 years. He was 51 years old in 2008, a former logger who had worked the forests around Cielum until a back injury forced him into early retirement in 1993. After the injury, after the workers' comp settlement that barely covered his medical bills, after the divorce that left him with nothing but a pickup truck and some camping gear, Eli made a choice. He would live alone. The cabin he built was modest, roughly 20 feet by 16 feet. One room serving as bedroom, kitchen, and living space. A wood-burning stove for heat, positioned in the corner, with a metal chimney pipe extending through the roof. No electricity, no running water. A rain catchment system and a nearby spring provided water in the warmer months. In winter, he melted snow in large pots on the wood stove. Eli made one supply run per month during the accessible season, May through October. He would hike the 11 miles down to where he kept an old pickup truck parked at the trailhead, drive into Clay Elum, and stock up on canned goods, propane for his camp stove, lamp oil, batteries, and firewood supplies when he couldn't cut enough himself. He kept to himself. He didn't have friends in town, but he wasn't hostile or strange. The clerks at the general store knew him by sight. He paid in cash. He never lingered for conversation. He never caused trouble. Every December, the Cascade Mountain Search and Rescue Unit, operating out of the Kittitas County Sheriff's Office, conducted routine aerial welfare checks on known remote residents. It was a precautionary measure, nothing more. The winters were brutal. People died from exposure, from accidents, from medical emergencies that went unnoticed for months until the spring thaw revealed their remains. On December 18, 2008, a search and rescue helicopter flew over Lookout Pass as part of the annual sweep. The pilot, a veteran named Jack Hendricks, noted that Eli's cabin appeared intact from the air. The structure was solid, the roof unbroken beneath the heavy snow. Most importantly, there was smoke rising from the chimney, a thin, steady plume, visible against the white landscape, gray against gray sky. Everything seemed normal. The report was filed as routine. Structure secure. Smoke observed. No distress signals. Resident presumed safe. But Eli was gone. The pilot couldn't have known that from the air. The smoke suggested life, warmth, human presence. It was the universal signal that someone was home, that someone was surviving the winter. It wasn't until December 27th, 9 days later, that a concerned ranger flagged the case for further review. The ranger, a man named Tom Breslin, who had worked the Cascade District for 12 years, had been reviewing the welfare check logs as part of his end-of-year reporting. He noticed something odd about Eli's entry. The smoke plume from Eli's cabin had been noted on December 18th at approximately 1:30 p.m., mid-afternoon. Tom cross-referenced that observation against his own knowledge of Eli's habits. Tom had met Eli several times over the years during routine check-ins. Eli was a man of rigid routine, shaped by the demands of survival in isolation. Eli typically extinguished his fire during the day to conserve wood, only stoking it again in the evening when temperatures dropped. Daytime fires were wasteful. Wood had to last the entire winter. A fire burning in the middle of the afternoon, on a relatively mild December day, was unusual. It suggested either that Eli was sick, too ill to move, keeping the fire high for warmth, or that something else was wrong. Tom requested a ground team be sent to investigate. The road to Lookout Pass had been buried under 4 feet of snow for nearly 2 weeks. The only way to reach the cabin was on foot, using snowshoes or cross-country skis. On December 28th, a team of 4 search and rescue personnel assembled at the trailhead. Cara Dennison, the team leader, Marcus Yates, a paramedic, Julia Trent, a wilderness survival specialist, and Derek Cole, a volunteer with mountaineering experience. They began the hike at 8 a.m. The trek took nearly 6 hours through deep, unbroken snow, navigating by GPS and topographic maps. The temperature hovered around 18 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was overcast, threatening more snow. They arrived at the cabin just after 2 p.m. The exterior appeared undisturbed. Snow had drifted against the north wall, nearly reaching the roofline. The chimney was no longer smoking, but the scent of burnt wood lingered in the cold, still air. The small clearing around the cabin, roughly 40 feet in diameter, was a pristine blanket of white. No tracks, no disturbances, just the wind-sculpted surface of deep snow. Kara called out, her voice cutting through the silence. "Elias Thorne, search and rescue. We're here to check on you." No response. She approached the door and knocked hard, 3 times. Nothing. She tried the handle. The door was latched from the inside. Kara made the decision. They would force entry. This was a welfare check. Eli could be injured, incapacitated, or dead inside. Derek used a pry bar to force the door open, splintering the wooden frame near the latch. The door swung inward with a groan of frozen hinges. What they found inside stopped them cold. The fire in the hearth was still smoldering, not roaring with flame, but glowing with deep orange embers buried beneath a thick layer of ash. The heat in the cabin was faint but present, radiating from the stove. Marcus, the paramedic, checked the temperature with a handheld thermometer. 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, but survivable. Nowhere near the threshold for hypothermia. On the small wooden table in the center of the room sat a ceramic dinner plate, chipped and worn from years of use. Half of a meal remained. Canned beef stew, congealed but not moldy, and a piece of bread, the edges hardened but still recognizably fresh. A fork rested neatly beside the plate, tines down, as if someone had simply paused mid-meal. In the single wooden chair, a handmade piece, the seat worn smooth by years of use, a paperback novel lay open, face down. The book was a mystery, a battered copy of The Big Sleep by Raymond Chandler, the cover faded and curled. The spine was cracked at page 142, the pages splayed open, as if the reader had just set it aside for a moment. Eli's heavy winter coat, a thick canvas Carhartt jacket lined with wool, stained with years of wood smoke and weather, hung on a wooden peg beside the door. Beneath it, his insulated snow boots sat side by side, laces still tied, caked with dried mud from some earlier excursion. On the shelf above the fireplace, next to a row of canned goods and a kerosene lantern, his emergency shortwave radio sat untouched. Marcus checked it later. Fully functional, batteries charged, antenna extended. Eli could have called for help at any time. The cabin's single door had been latched from the inside using a simple sliding bolt lock, the kind you install yourself, a metal bar that slides horizontally into a bracket mounted on the doorframe. The bolt had been fully engaged when they arrived. The only other possible exit was a small, hinged window set high on the back wall, near the roofline, designed for ventilation during the warmer months. The window was unlatched. It hung open roughly 3 inches, cold air seeping through the gap, disturbing the stillness. Kara approached the window and examined it carefully. She pulled a tape measure from her pack. Dimensions: 18 inches wide by 14 inches tall. The frame was rough-cut lumber, splintered and weathered. She radioed down to base and requested Eli's physical description from DMV records. The response came back 20 minutes later. Height 6 feet 1 inch. Weight 212 pounds. Kara did the math in her head, then consulted with Julia, the survival specialist. They measured Eli's coat. They estimated shoulder width based on the jacket's dimensions and photographic records, pulled from his old driver's license. Shoulder width, approximately 22 inches. The conclusion was immediate and impossible. Even if Eli had stripped completely naked, even if he had exhaled every ounce of air from his lungs, even if he had somehow dislocated both shoulders and compressed his ribcage to the point of skeletal fracture, he could not have fit through that window. The human body has physical limits. Bones do not compress beyond a certain point. The ribcage, designed to protect vital organs, is rigid. The skull, the pelvis, these structures cannot be collapsed or deformed without catastrophic injury. Eli's frame was too large. The window was too small. And yet, the door had been bolted from the inside. You might wonder if there was some other explanation. A hidden exit, a concealed passage, some detail the team missed. There was none. The cabin was a single room, roughly 320 square feet. Every inch was visible. The floor was solid, raw pine planks nailed directly to floor joists, with no crawl space beneath. The walls were log construction, chinked with moss and mud. No hidden doors, no false panels. The only exits were the door and the window. Kara ordered an immediate search of the surrounding area. The team fanned out from the cabin, moving in a grid pattern, searching for any sign of Eli. Derek found the tracks. A single set of boot prints led away from the cabin's front door. The tracks were partially filled in by recent snowfall, but still visible. Deep impressions in the snow. The tread pattern, consistent with heavy winter boots. The tracks led approximately 30 yards to a small woodshed, a simple three-sided structure covered with a blue tarp where Eli stored split firewood stacked in neat rows. The tracks then returned to the cabin, directly to the front door. The trail clear and unambiguous. The team consulted their weather data and timeline reconstruction. The most recent heavy snowfall in the area had occurred on December 16th, 2 days before the aerial welfare check. Approximately 8 inches had fallen, covering the ground in a fresh, even layer. The boot prints Derek found were beneath that layer, partially obscured by the December 16th snowfall, then lightly dusted by subsequent flurries. The timeline was this. Eli had gone to the woodshed, retrieved firewood, and returned to the cabin sometime before December 16th. He had entered through the front door and bolted it from the inside. After that point, the snow had fallen, sealing the area in a pristine, unbroken blanket of white. If Eli had exited the cabin after December 16th, through the door or the window, he would have left fresh tracks on top of the new snow. The snow around the cabin was deep, soft, and undisturbed. Wind patterns in the clearing were minimal due to the surrounding trees. Fresh tracks would have been clearly visible. There were no other footprints, no tracks leading into the woods, no signs of struggle, departure, or disturbance. Elias Thorne had entered his cabin before December 16th, bolted the door, and then, according to the physical evidence, never left. But he was gone. At this point, you're asking how this could possibly happen. The investigative team brought in additional specialists. A forensic psychologist from Seattle, a wilderness medicine expert from the University of Washington, and a structural engineer to examine the cabin for hidden exits. The leading theory centered on paradoxical undressing, a well-documented phenomenon associated with severe hypothermia. In the final stages of cold exposure, victims experience a malfunction in the brain's temperature regulation system. The hypothalamus, overwhelmed by conflicting signals, interprets extreme cold as extreme heat. Victims feel unbearably hot and begin removing their clothing, often in the moments before death. In rare cases, hypothermia also causes terminal burrowing behavior, a primitive, instinctual response where victims seek out small, enclosed spaces, attempting to hide as their cognitive functions shut down. The theory suggested that Eli may have experienced a sudden, acute hypothermic episode, perhaps triggered by a carbon monoxide leak from the wood stove, or an undiagnosed medical condition such as a stroke or heart arrhythmia, and in a state of delirium, attempted to escape the cabin through the only opening available, the window. In this state, driven by irrational panic, he may have forced himself through the impossibly small window, sustaining severe injuries in the process: broken ribs, dislocated shoulders, lacerations, and then staggered into the wilderness where he succumbed to exposure within minutes. But the environmental conditions inside the cabin contradicted that theory. The fire was burning. The interior temperature, measured when the team arrived, was 54 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold, yes, but well above the threshold for hypothermia, which typically begins when core body temperature drops below 95 degrees. The cabin showed no signs of carbon monoxide buildup. The stove's ventilation was functioning properly. Air quality tests conducted later found no elevated KO levels. Eli's food was half-eaten. His book was open. His routine appeared entirely normal, unchanged, undisturbed. If he had been experiencing a medical emergency or psychological break, there would have been signs: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, frantic movements, attempts to reach the radio. There were none. The scene suggested a man who had paused in the middle of an ordinary evening, set down his book, stepped away from his meal, and then simply ceased to exist. The search for Eli Thorne expanded immediately and continued for weeks. Teams combed the surrounding forest, checking ravines, frozen streams, dense underbrush, the steep slopes leading down from Lookout Pass. They deployed thermal imaging drones capable of detecting heat signatures beneath snow. They brought in cadaver dogs trained specifically to locate human remains in sub-zero environments. They found nothing. The prevailing investigative conclusion, documented in the official report filed by Kittitas County, was this: Elias Thorne, driven by an unknown compulsion. Perhaps a sudden neurological event, perhaps a psychological break triggered by isolation and the sensory deprivation of a long winter alone, somehow forced himself through the impossibly small window, sustaining catastrophic injuries in the process. Once outside, barefoot, and likely unclothed or minimally clothed, he would have been exposed to sub-zero temperatures. Death from exposure would have occurred within 10 to 15 minutes. The vast, unforgiving wilderness of the Cascades, combined with the deep snowpack and the density of the forest, would have made recovery of his remains nearly impossible. His body, if it's out there, is buried so deep beneath snow, hidden so thoroughly in the undergrowth, entombed so completely by the wilderness, that it may never be found. The cabin on Lookout Pass still stands. It was cleared, documented, and sealed by Kittitas County in early 2009. Eli's personal belongings, his books, his tools, his few photographs, his handwritten journals documenting weather patterns and wildlife sightings, were cataloged and stored by the sheriff's office. No next of kin ever came forward to claim them. Local hikers occasionally report seeing the cabin during summer treks into the high country. Some say they've felt an inexplicable unease near the structure, a weight in the air, a silence that feels too deep. Others dismiss it as the natural discomfort of encountering an abandoned, isolated place where someone's life simply ended without explanation. The case of Elias Thorne remains one of the most baffling disappearances in Washington state history. Not because of violence, not because of foul play, but because of the quiet, suffocating impossibility of a man vanishing from a locked room through a window he could not possibly fit through, leaving behind a half-eaten meal and an open book as the only evidence he was ever there. But the locked door haunted investigators more than anything else. Why would Eli bolt the door from the inside if he intended to leave through the window? Why would someone experiencing a sudden medical or psychological crisis take the time to secure the cabin before departing? And if Eli didn't leave willingly, if something forced him out, what was it? And how did it get inside a locked room? The silence of Lookout Pass offers no answers. Only the cold, the cabin, and the small window that should have been far too small. The Christmas party in the old mill house. Hopewell, Virginia, December 22, 1985. Hopewell is a historic mill town on the banks of the Appomattox River, roughly 25 miles southeast of Richmond. Founded in the early 1800s, the town's economy was built on textile manufacturing, tobacco processing, and the operation of several grain mills powered by the river's current. By 1985, most of the mills had closed, victims of modernization and the movement of manufacturing overseas, but the town retained its historic character. The population hovered around 22,000. Colonial-era homes lined the residential streets. The downtown was preserved, protected by historical society regulations. Families had lived there for generations, their names carved into cemetery stones dating back to the Civil War. Social hierarchies were entrenched and unspoken. Everyone knew everyone, and more importantly, everyone knew everyone's place. The old mill house was one of Hopewell's most prominent landmarks. A large, imposing structure built in 1847, constructed of dark fieldstone quarried from the river and heavy timber beams salvaged from decommissioned ships. Originally a functioning grain mill, it had been restored in the 1970s and converted into a community event space used for weddings, town meetings, charity auctions, and holiday gatherings. The building was 3 stories tall. The main event hall occupied the ground floor, a large open space with exposed beam ceilings, polished wood floors, and tall windows overlooking the river. The second floor housed storage rooms, administrative offices, and smaller meeting rooms. The third floor, largely unfinished and inaccessible to the public, was used for additional storage and rarely visited. On December 22, 1985, the Hopewell Chamber of Commerce hosted its annual Christmas party at the Old Mill House. It was the social event of the season. Over 150 people attended: local business owners, municipal employees, educators, prominent families, and their spouses. The event began at 8 p.m. There was a live band playing jazz standards and holiday classics. A buffet table offered ham, roasted vegetables, dinner rolls, and an assortment of desserts. An open bar served wine, beer, and cocktails. The atmosphere was warm, festive, filled with the hum of conversation and laughter. Jessica Lee was 27 years old, a second-grade teacher at Hopewell Elementary School. She had grown up in Hopewell, the daughter of a postal worker and a seamstress. She had attended the local high school, graduated near the top of her class, and earned her teaching degree from Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond before returning home to teach. She was well liked by colleagues and parents, described universally as kind, patient, professional, and dedicated to her students. She lived in a small apartment on the north side of town. She was engaged to be married the following spring to a man named David Klein, a civil engineer who worked for the Virginia Department of Transportation in Richmond. David was out of state that week, visiting his family in Columbus, Ohio, for the holidays. Jessica had attended the party alone, arriving around 8:30 p.m. in her own car. Multiple witnesses recalled seeing Jessica throughout the evening. She spoke with fellow teachers near the buffet table. She danced briefly with a male coworker during a slow song. She spent time talking with the school principal and his wife. She appeared relaxed, happy, in good spirits. At approximately 11:30 p.m., she was observed standing near the base of the main staircase, a wide carpeted staircase that led to the second floor, engaged in conversation with a group of 5 men. The men were well known in Hopewell. All were prominent figures in the community, men whose names appeared regularly in the local newspaper, men who sat on boards and commissions, men who made decisions that shaped the town's future. The 5 men were Walter Gaines, 52 years old, a city councilman serving his 3rd term, known for his influence over zoning decisions and municipal contracts. Harold Mitch, 48, the senior vice president of Hopewell, First National Bank, the institution that held mortgages for half the town and financed most local business expansions. Clayton Fairchild, 58, a local attorney who had represented several major property developers and handled the legal work for numerous land deals and estate settlements. Thomas Ridley, 45, a real estate developer who owned significant commercial holdings in the town, including the Strip Mall, the largest office building downtown, and several rental properties. Gerard Moss, 42, the owner of Moss Construction, the largest building contractor in the region, responsible for nearly every major construction project in Hopewell over the past decade. All 5 men were married. All were older than Jessica by at least 15 years. All held positions of social, economic, and political influence in Hopewell. A bartender working the event, a young man named Tevin Stiles, 23, hired through a catering company, Latter told police that he had noticed the conversation from across the room. He said it appeared cordial, relaxed. Jessica was smiling, nodding, holding a glass of white wine. The men were laughing, gesturing casually, the body language unremarkable. At approximately 11:42 p.m., Jessica was seen walking away from the group, heading toward the rear hallway on the ground floor. The hallway led to a set of restrooms and a back stairwell that accessed the second floor, separate from the main staircase in the event hall. That was the last confirmed sighting of Jessica Lee. At 12:45 a.m., as the party began to wind down and guests started departing, Jessica's co-worker, a woman named Linda Pruitt, a fellow teacher at Hopewell Elementary, noticed that Jessica's car was still in the parking lot. Linda had assumed Jessica had left earlier. She walked back into the event hall, now much emptier, and looked around. She didn't see Jessica. Linda checked the restrooms. Empty. She asked other attendees if they had seen Jessica. No one had, not in the past hour. Linda walked outside to the parking lot and confirmed. Jessica's car, a light blue 1982 Honda Accord, was parked in the third row, untouched, covered with a light frost. Linda returned inside and found Jessica's purse. It had been placed neatly beneath the buffet table, tucked out of sight but not hidden. Inside were Jessica's wallet, her driver's license, $37 in cash, her car keys, and a small compact mirror. By 1:15 a.m., Linda called the Hopewell Police Department. Officers arrived within 20 minutes. They conducted an immediate, systematic search of the old mill house, checking every room on the ground floor, the restrooms, the kitchen, the coat check area, the storage closets. Jessica was not there. The 5 men were still at the party, lingering near the bar, talking and laughing. Officers approached them and asked to speak with each one individually. Detective Raymond Cole, the lead investigator, a 20-year veteran of the Hopewell PD, conducted the interviews personally. Their accounts were nearly identical, so identical that Detective Cole noted it specifically in his report. Each man stated that Jessica had approached them around 11:30 p.m. to say hello. They said she was friendly, warm, in good spirits. They had chatted briefly about the holidays, the party, her upcoming wedding in the spring. During the conversation, Jessica mentioned feeling unwell. She said she had a headache, possibly the beginning of a cold or the flu. She said the noise in the crowd were making it worse. She mentioned she might sit down for a few minutes in a quieter area before heading home. The men said they offered to help. Walter Gaines said he offered to call someone to give her a ride. Harold Mitch said he offered to get her water or aspirin. Clayton Fairchild said he suggested she sit down in one of the quieter rooms upstairs. Jessica politely declined all offers. She said she just needed a few minutes of quiet, and then she would leave on her own. The men said they returned to their conversation. None of them saw Jessica again after that. The consistency of their statements was remarkable, not just similar, but identical in phrasing, timing, and detail. They used the same words to describe Jessica's demeanor: friendly, warm, in good spirits. They recalled the exact same sequence of events. Jessica approached them, mentioned feeling unwell, declined their offers of help, and walked away. They even used the same phrase to describe her departure. She said she just needed a few minutes. Detective Cole noted in his report. The uniformity of the statements provided by Gaines, Mitch, Fairchild, Ridley, and Moss is highly unusual and, in my professional experience, inconsistent with truthful recollection. Even honest witnesses recall events differently due to variations in attention, perception, and memory. Minor discrepancies in timing, phrasing, and observation are normal and expected. But without physical evidence, without a body, without any witness contradicting their unified account, there was nothing to pursue criminally. The men were prominent. They were respected. They had alibis, each other, power, and they had lawyers. Then, 3 days later, something unexpected surfaced. On the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, an anonymous phone call was placed to the Hopewell Police Department. The caller was a woman. She refused to identify herself. She spoke quickly, nervously. She stated that she had been at the Christmas party on December 22nd. and had seen Jessica Lee being led by one of the 5 men into a locked storage room on the 2nd floor, shortly after 11:40 p.m. The dispatcher tried to keep her on the line, tried to get a name, a callback number, any identifying information. The woman refused and hung up. Detective Cole immediately requested phone records. The call had been traced to a payphone located outside a 7-Eleven convenience store on Route 10, roughly 3 miles from downtown Hopewell. Working with the phone company and reviewing the timestamp, Cole identified a vehicle that had been seen near the payphone at the time of the call. A 1983 Buick Regal, tan, registered to Margaret Ridley, the wife of Thomas Ridley, the real estate developer. Cole drove to the Ridley residence that afternoon and requested to speak with Margaret. She was 41 years old, well-dressed, nervous. She initially denied making the call. She said she had attended the party but had left early, around 10:30 p.m., because she wasn't feeling well. She said she had gone straight home. Cole pressed. He told her he had the phone records. He told her a witness had seen her car near the payphone. Margaret's composure broke. She admitted she had made the call. She said that around 11:40 p.m., she had gone upstairs to use one of the 2nd-floor restrooms. There had been a long line for the main restrooms on the ground floor, and she knew there was another restroom upstairs near the offices. As she walked down the 2nd-floor hallway, dimly lit and quiet, she saw Jessica Lee being led by one of the 5 men. She couldn't say which one. The lighting was poor. Into a darkened storage room at the end of the hall. Did Jessica appear to be resisting? Cole asked. Margaret hesitated. No. She was just walking with him. But the room wasn't supposed to be used. It was locked. What did you do? I went to the restroom and then I left. I didn't think it was important until I heard she was missing. Cole asked why she had waited 3 days to report it. Margaret looked directly at him and said quietly, "Because I was afraid." Of what? Of them. Of what they could do. Cole pushed for details, but Margaret retracted her statement almost immediately. Within the hour, she called the police station and formally recanted. She said she had been mistaken. Maybe it wasn't Jessica. Maybe it was someone else wearing a similar dress. Maybe she had misidentified the people involved. The retraction was abrupt, suspiciously timed, and clearly coached. Cole suspected, knew really, that Margaret had been pressured by her husband or the other men to recant her statement. The storage room on the 2nd floor was immediately secured and forensically examined. It was a small room, roughly 10 feet by 12 feet, filled with folding chairs, old decorations, and boxes of archived documents. It was empty of any sign of Jessica. Forensic teams swept the room for fingerprints, fibers, blood, hair, anything that might indicate Jessica had been there. They found nothing conclusive. The room had been used for storage for years. Dozens of fingerprints were recovered, none matchable to Jessica or definitively linked to any suspect. And that was where the investigation stalled. You might wonder why Margaret Ridley would retract such a significant statement. The answer lies in the suffocating social structure of small towns like Hopewell. The 5 men were not just prominent. They controlled the town's economy. Thomas Ridley owned commercial properties that housed dozens of local businesses. Gerard Moss's construction company employed over 100 workers, and their families depended on his contracts. Harold Mitch managed lending decisions at the only major bank: mortgages, business loans, lines of credit. Walter Gaines influenced municipal contracts, zoning approvals, permits. Clayton Fairchild had legal leverage over land deals, estates, business disputes. To accuse them publicly, to testify against them, to contradict their unified story, was to risk everything: social ostracism, economic retaliation, the quiet destruction that small towns inflict on those who challenge power. Margaret Ridley understood this. She made the anonymous call, hoping it would be enough to force a real investigation. When her identity was discovered, the pressure was immediate and overwhelming. She recanted within hours. The investigation collapsed. Forensic teams swept the entire old mill house. They found no blood, no signs of struggle, no physical evidence of foul play anywhere in the building. Jessica's bank account showed no activity after December 22nd. Her apartment was checked, undisturbed, neat, no signs of planning to leave. Her fiancé, David Klein, had an airtight alibi, confirmed by his family, airline records, and credit card receipts in Ohio. He was cleared immediately and devastated. Jessica Lee was declared a missing person. The case remains open to this day. The old mill house continued to host events for another decade before it was finally closed in 1996 due to structural issues and sold to a private investor. It's now a bed and breakfast, marketed to tourists visiting historic Virginia. The 5 men are all deceased now. Walter Gaines died of a heart attack in 1998. Harold Mitch died of lung cancer in 2003. Clayton Fairchild died in a single-vehicle car accident in 2007. Thomas Ridley died of a stroke in 2011. Gerard Moss died of complications from diabetes in 2015. None of them ever faced charges. None of them ever changed their story. None of them ever spoke publicly about Jessica Lee after the initial investigation. And the truth of what happened to Jessica in the final 45 minutes of that Christmas party remains locked away, protected by the silent, suffocating loyalty of a small town that chose its powerful over its missing. Because in places like Hopewell, where everyone knows everyone, where reputations are currency and social standing, what matters is who controls the narrative. And in 1985, 5 men controlled it completely. The gift-wrapped vanishing. Reedsburg, Wisconsin, December 19th, 2003. Reedsburg is a small, conservative town in south-central Wisconsin, roughly 60 miles northwest of Madison, situated in the rolling farmland and forest that defines the region. Population: 9,000. The downtown is a grid of 2-story brick buildings, locally owned shops, and the kind of main street that appears on postcards promoting authentic small-town America. Arthur Bell owned one of those shops, Bell's Toy Emporium. The store had been a fixture of Reedsburg for over 20 years, occupying a narrow storefront on Main Street between Mueller's Bakery and Hanson's Hardware. The exterior was painted forest green with gold lettering on the windows that read, in elegant script, Bell's Toy Emporium, Estimate, 1981. A hand-carved wooden sign hung above the door, depicting a toy soldier standing at attention beside a teddy bear. Inside, the store was a museum of childhood nostalgia. Wooden shelves, built by Arthur himself, lined the walls from floor to ceiling, loaded with vintage toys that seemed frozen in time. Tin wind-up trains that rattled along circular tracks, porcelain dolls with delicate glass eyes and lace dresses, hand-painted wooden puzzles, cast-iron model cars, stuffed animals with carefully stitched smeals, wooden blocks with hand-carved letters. There were no plastic action figures, no electronic gadgets, no licensed merchandise from movies or television shows, no batteries required. Arthur was meticulous about this philosophy. He believed in real toys, objects that required imagination, creativity, and interaction, not passive consumption. Arthur Bell was 48 years old in 2003, unmarried, no children, no siblings. His parents had both passed away years earlier. He lived alone in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above the toy store, accessed by a narrow wooden staircase at the rear of the building. Neighbors and regular customers described Arthur as kind, soft-spoken, and intensely private. He never talked about his personal life. He never socialized outside of brief, polite interactions in the store. He opened at 9:00 a.m. every day without fail and closed at 6:00 p.m., except during the Christmas season, when he extended hours until 8:00 p.m. to accommodate holiday shoppers. Arthur was known, locally famous even, for his elaborate Christmas window display. Every year, starting in early November, he would spend weeks constructing a mechanical holiday scene in the store's large front window, a miniature Victorian village with moving parts, rotating figures, twinkling lights, clockwork trains that chugged through tunnels, and tiny ice skaters that circled a mirrored pond. The mechanisms were intricate, built and repaired by Arthur using salvaged watch parts, old music box components, and custom gears he machined himself in the back workroom. Children gathered every evening after school to watch the display, their breath fogging the glass. Parents took photographs. Families made it a tradition to visit the window together. It was one of the defining images of Christmas in Reedsburg. On the morning of December 19th, 2003, a regular customer, a woman named Ellen Hoffman, 64, a retired librarian, arrived at Belle's Toy Emporium at 9:15 a.m. to pick up a custom dollhouse she had special ordered for her granddaughter's Christmas gift. The door was unlocked. The lights were off. Arthur was not there. Ellen called out, "Arthur? Hello? It's Ellen Hoffman." No response. She assumed Arthur had stepped out briefly, perhaps to the bakery next door for coffee, perhaps to his apartment upstairs, and had left the door open by mistake. Unusual, but not alarming. She waited 5 minutes, then 10. When Arthur didn't return, and when she noticed that the cash register was sitting open and full of bills, Ellen became concerned and called the police. Officers arrived at 9:35 a.m. 2 patrol officers, responding to what they assumed was a welfare check or possible medical emergency. They conducted a walkthrough of the store. The layout was simple. The main retail floor, roughly 40 feet deep and 20 feet wide. A small back office behind the counter, cluttered with invoices and catalogs, and a storage room accessed through a narrow doorway at the rear. The cash register was full. Officers counted $847 in bills and coins, an unusually large amount for a small business to leave unsecured, especially overnight. Arthur's winter coat, a heavy wool overcoat, navy blue, worn at the cuffs, hung on a hook in the back office. His car keys sat on the desk beside a pair of reading glasses. His wallet was in the desk drawer, containing his driver's license, $73 in cash, and a single credit card. Officers went upstairs to check Arthur's apartment. The door was unlocked. The apartment was neat, orderly. The bed was made with military precision, corners tucked. The kitchen was clean, dishes washed and put away. Nothing appeared disturbed or out of place. Arthur Bell had simply vanished. Then the officers opened the storage room. The storage room was located at the very back of the shop, behind the office. It was small, roughly 12 feet by 15 feet, lined with metal shelving units typically used to store excess inventory, wrapping supplies, seasonal decorations, and shipping boxes. But on this morning, the room was filled with gifts, hundreds of them, wrapped packages, stacked from floor to ceiling, covering every available surface. The shelving units were loaded to capacity. The floor was barely visible beneath the sheer volume of boxes. Each package was wrapped in identical paper, red foil with white snowflakes, the kind sold in bulk at craft stores. Each was tied with a white satin ribbon, the bows perfectly symmetrical, tied with precision. Each package was tagged with a small white card, roughly 3 inches by 2 inches, attached to the ribbon with a loop of string. One of the officers picked up the nearest package, a medium-sized box, perhaps containing a doll or a stuffed animal, and read the tag. Handwritten in neat block letters, black ink. To a child. He checked another package. Same tag, same handwriting. Another, and another. Every single package, later counted by forensic teams at 312 total, was addressed identically. To a child. No specific names, no ages, no genders, just the universal, anonymous designation. Officers carefully opened several of the packages to catalog the contents. Inside were toys from Arthur's inventory. Porcelain dolls, wooden trucks, jigsaw puzzles, stuffed teddy bears, tin wind-up toys, building block sets, miniature tea sets, hand-carved animals. Each toy had been carefully selected, wrapped with obsessive precision. No creases in the paper, no tears. Every corner folded with geometric exactness, the edges aligned perfectly. The ribbons tied identically, the loops even and symmetrical. It would have taken days, possibly weeks, to prepare this many gifts with such meticulous care. But then something unexpected surfaced. On the desk in the back office, beside Arthur's wallet and keys, police found a small, leather-bound diary. The diary was old, the cover worn smooth by handling. It contained sporadic entries dating back several years, mostly notes about inventory, suppliers, repairs needed for the window display mechanisms. The diary was open to the final entry, dated December 18th, 2003, the night before Arthur vanished. The entry contained no narrative, no sentences, no context or explanation. Just 2 words, handwritten in black ink, repeated over and over again, filling the entire page from top to bottom, margin to margin. They know. Yeah. They know. They know. Over 50 times. The handwriting started neat and controlled at the top of the page, the letters evenly spaced, the pressure consistent. By the middle of the page, the letters began to slant, the spacing irregular. By the bottom, the pressure increased dramatically. The pen dug deeply into the paper, tearing through in several places, leaving ragged gashes in the page. The final repetitions were barely legible, scrawled with frantic, erratic strokes, the words overlapping and smeared. The psychological profile that emerged from this evidence was deeply, disturbingly contradictory. On one hand, Arthur had spent considerable time, hundreds of hours, easily, preparing gifts for children. The wrapping alone would have required immense focus, patience, calm, and dedication. The selection of toys suggested thoughtfulness, care, an intent to bring joy. On the other hand, the diary entry suggested paranoia, terror, psychological collapse. The repetition of the phrase "they know" indicated obsessive, intrusive thoughts. The degradation of the handwriting suggested escalating panic. How could both realities exist simultaneously? Investigators interviewed Arthur's limited circle of acquaintances, regular customers, neighboring shop owners, his landlord, the postal carrier who delivered his mail. No one reported recent behavioral changes. No one knew of any conflicts, threats, debts, or troubles in Arthur's life. No one had ever heard Arthur mention feeling unsafe, being watched, or fearing anyone. Arthur had no criminal record, no documented history of mental illness in his medical records, which were subpoenaed from his primary care physician. No prior interactions with law enforcement, not even a traffic ticket. The phrase "they know" was never explained. Who were they? What did they know? Search teams were deployed immediately. Reedsburg is bordered by dense forests to the north and the Baraboo River to the south. Teams checked the riverbanks, the woods, abandoned buildings, rural properties, barns, sheds, anywhere Arthur might have gone or been taken. Arthur Bell was never found. The leading investigative theory, advanced by a forensic psychologist consulted on the case, was that Arthur experienced a sudden, acute psychotic break, possibly triggered by social isolation, undiagnosed schizophrenia with late onset, or severe seasonal depression exacerbated by the pressure of the holiday season. In this state, consumed by paranoid delusions that they were coming for him, Arthur may have walked into the nearby wilderness in a state of delirium, where he succumbed to exposure. December in Wisconsin is brutal. Nighttime temperatures that week had dropped into the low teens. Daytime highs barely reached the mid-20s. Without a coat, without preparation, without shelter, survival would have been unlikely beyond a few hours. But the methodical preparation of the gifts contradicted the chaos suggested by the diary. If Arthur was descending into paranoia and fear, if he believed they were closing in, why did he continue wrapping presents with such obsessive care and precision? And if Arthur was planning to disappear voluntarily, staging an escape, faking his death, starting a new life, why would he leave behind the cash register full of money, his car keys, his wallet, and his warm coat in the middle of winter? The case file offers no resolution to these contradictions. At this point, you're asking whether they were real, whether Arthur had become aware of a genuine threat, or whether they existed only in Arthur's unraveling mind, phantoms born of isolation and mental illness. The answer depends entirely on how you interpret the evidence, and investigators remain divided. If you believe Arthur was mentally ill, then they were delusions, paranoid projections, auditory hallucinations, the terrifying manifestations of a mind collapsing under the weight of undiagnosed psychosis. If you believe Arthur was responding to a real threat, then they were actual people. Individuals who knew something about Arthur, something he desperately wanted to keep hidden, something that drove him to prepare gifts as a final act of penance before fleeing or being silent. But what could that secret be? Arthur had no criminal past, no scandals, no known enemies, no debts, no romantic entanglements, no business disputes. One theory, purely speculative, advanced by a local journalist who covered the case, suggested that Arthur may have been struggling with repressed guilt or shame related to his childlessness and isolation. The gifts, all addressed to a child, may have represented Arthur's deep, unfulfilled longing to be a father, to contribute meaningfully to the lives of children, to leave behind some legacy of kindness. The diary entry, they know, may have reflected Arthur's internalized belief that others in the community judged him for his solitary, childless existence, that they, neighbors, customers, society at large, knew he was incomplete, a failure, unworthy of love or family. In this interpretation, Arthur's disappearance was an act of self-imposed exile, a final, desperate attempt to escape the unbearable weight of shame and isolation. But that's speculation, not evidence. What is certain is this: Bell's Toy Emporium was closed permanently in early 2024. The inventory, including the 312 wrapped gifts, was eventually donated to local charities, children's hospitals, and foster care agencies across southern Wisconsin. The building stood empty for several years before being purchased and converted into a coffee shop in 2011. Arthur Bell's case remains open, classified as a missing person presumed dead. And every December, when the holiday decorations go up along Main Street in Reedsburg, a few longtime residents still remember the toy store, the elaborate window display, and the strange, sad man who wrapped hundreds of gifts for children he would never meet, and who vanished into the frozen Wisconsin night, leaving behind only 2 words, repeated 50 times in increasingly frantic handwriting. They know. No. But no one knows what they knew, or who they were, or whether Arthur Bell is still out there, somewhere in the woods, waiting to be found. The Broken Tinsel Trail, Yucca Wells, Nevada, December 15th, 1990. Yucca Wells is a desert town, dusty, sun-scorched, isolated, located roughly 80 miles northeast of Las Vegas, off a 2-lane highway that cuts through endless stretches of scrubland, rocky desert, and flat, featureless terrain that seems to stretch forever in every direction. Yucca Wells exists because of a single historical accident, a natural spring discovered in the 1880s that made the area a viable way station for travelers crossing the Mojave Desert. By 1990, the population had dwindled to just under 1,000 people. The town consisted of a handful of streets lined with low-slung, blocky buildings, cinder block construction painted in faded pastels, designed to withstand the brutal desert heat that could reach 115 degrees in summer. A single gas station, a general store, a diner with a neon sign that flickered at night, a small post office, a sheriff's substation staffed by 2 deputies, and a high school. Yucca Wells High School served students from 3 surrounding communities, tiny clusters of homes scattered across the desert, connected by dirt roads, busting daily across miles of empty land. Total enrollment, 240 students, grades 9 through 12. The economy was sustained by a nearby military testing facility, classified operations, restricted airspace, and a scattering of cattle ranches that somehow coaxed livestock from the unforgiving terrain, supplemented by government subsidies and sheer stubbornness. Lisa Jenkins was 16 years old in December 1990, a junior at Yucca Wells High School. Quiet, responsible, serious about her future. A straight-A student who played clarinet in the school band, tutored younger students in math after school, and had already begun researching college scholarships because her family couldn't afford tuition. She lived with her mother, Carol, a single parent who worked as an administrative assistant at the county clerk's office in the next town over, and her older brother, Marcus, who was 19 and worked the evening shift at the gas station on Highway 95. Lisa's father had left when she was 7. No contact since. No child support. Carol raised her children alone, working long hours, stretching every dollar. On the evening of December 15, 1990, Lisa attended a mandatory rehearsal for the school's annual Christmas pageant. The pageant was scheduled for December 20th, 5 days before Christmas. It was one of the few community events in Yucca Wells that brought families together. A tradition dating back decades, performed in the high school auditorium. Free admission, followed by cookies and punch in the cafeteria. Lisa had a small role in the choir. She wasn't a lead performer, not a soloist, but attendance at rehearsals was mandatory for all participants. The drama teacher, Mrs. Patricia Voss, was strict about that rule. The rehearsal was held in the high school auditorium, a cavernous space with a stage, threadbare velvet curtains, and rows of fold-down seats. It began at 6 p.m. and was scheduled to end at 8:30 p.m. Lisa's mother was supposed to pick her up after the rehearsal, but her car, a 1983 Chevy Citation with over 140,000 miles on it, had broken down that afternoon. The alternator had failed. The car was at Jensen's Auto Repair, and the part wouldn't arrive until the following day. Lisa called home at 8:20 p.m., using the payphone in the school hallway near the main entrance. She spoke to her mother and told her the rehearsal was running a few minutes late. Oz was working through a problem with the lighting cues. Lisa said she would wait inside the school until her brother Marcus could come pick her up. Marcus was working the closing shift at the gas station. He told his mother he would leave as soon as his replacement arrived, scheduled for 9 p.m., and drive straight to the high school to get Lisa. Marcus arrived at Yucca Wells High School at 9:15 p.m. The parking lot was empty. The main entrance was locked, the heavy metal doors chained from the inside. The lights inside the building were off, except for a single hallway light near the administrative offices, glowing faintly through the windows. Marcus drove around to the rear of the building, where students typically waited for rides after evening events. There was a covered area, a concrete overhang supported by 4 metal posts, painted industrial yellow, designed to provide shade during the brutal daytime heat. Lisa was not there. Marcus honked the horn twice. He got out of his truck, a beat-up 1979 Ford F-150 with a cracked windshield, and called her name. Lisa. Let's go. No response. He walked around the perimeter of the building, checking the side entrances, peering through windows, looking for any sign of movement or light. Nothing. At 9:25 p.m., Marcus returned to the rear entrance and found the custodian, a man named Dale Pruitt, 56 years old, who had worked at the high school for over 20 years, locking up the building, securing the metal gates over the rear doors. Marcus approached him. "Hey, Dale, have you seen my sister, Lisa Jenkins? She was supposed to be waiting here." Dale stopped, keys in hand, and frowned. "Lisa? No, I haven't seen her. Rehearsal ended around 8:35, maybe 8:40. Most of the kids got picked up by 8:50. I did a sweep of the auditorium and the hallways before locking up. Didn't see anyone inside." Marcus felt the first stirring of real concern. "You're sure?" "Yeah, I'm sure. I checked everywhere. The building's empty." Marcus asked if Lisa might still be inside the building, maybe in a restroom or a classroom. Dale, seeing the worry on Marcus's face, unlocked the rear entrance and allowed him to search. They walked through the dim hallways together, checking the auditorium, the restrooms, the band room, the cafeteria, the classrooms. Lisa was not there. Marcus drove through the surrounding streets, checking the few places that were still open at that hour. The diner, the gas station where he worked, the general store. He stopped and asked if anyone had seen Lisa. No one had. He called friends' houses from payphones. No one had seen her. No one knew where she was. At 9:40 p.m., Lisa's mother, Carol, called the Nye County Sheriff's Department from her home phone, her voice shaking with fear. The call was answered by a dispatcher named Sharon Kelly. Sharon was a temporary hire, brought in to cover holiday shifts due to staffing shortages. She had been on the job for less than 2 weeks, still learning the computer system, still memorizing protocols and procedures. When Carol Jenkins reported her daughter missing, Sharon asked a series of standard screening questions, reading from a laminated card taped to the desk. "How old is your daughter?" 16. "How long has she been missing?" "About an hour. Maybe an hour and 15 minutes. Does she have a history of running away or staying out without permission?" "No, never. She's very responsible." "Any known conflicts at home? Arguments? Discipline issues?" "No, nothing like that." "Does she have a boyfriend? Any romantic relationships that might explain her being out?" "No, she doesn't date. She's focused on school." "Any history of drug or alcohol use?" "Absolutely not." Based on the answers, and based on her limited training and the protocols she had been taught, Sharon classified the case as a probable runaway. The classification was standard for missing teens who had been gone for less than 24 hours and had no immediate signs of foul play. Sharon filed a report, entered the information into the system, and told Carol Jenkins that a deputy would follow up within 24 hours, possibly sooner if one became available. She did not trigger an immediate investigative response. No officers were dispatched to the school. No search was initiated. No alert was issued to surrounding law enforcement agencies. The report sat in the queue, flagged as low priority, while Sharon moved on to handle other calls. A domestic disturbance, a traffic accident on Highway 95, a noise complaint. It wasn't until the morning of December 17th, 48 hours later, that a supervising deputy named Carl Mendez arrived for his shift, reviewed the incident reports from the previous 2 days, and realized the catastrophic mistake. Lisa Jenkins was not a runaway. She was a missing minor, last seen at a school event, with no history of behavioral issues, no logical reason to disappear, and a family frantically searching for her. Mendez immediately escalated the case, cursing under his breath, knowing that 2 entire days had been lost. By the time investigators arrived at Yucca Wells High School to process the scene, 48 critical hours had passed since Lisa's disappearance. The desert wind, a constant, relentless force in the region, unobstructed by trees or hills, had obliterated any potential evidence. Tire tracks, footprints, any trace of movement near the rear entrance where Lisa was supposed to wait. Gone, swept away by wind and scattered dust, and the dry, shifting sand that defines the desert landscape. The single security camera that covered the rear entrance, an outdated system installed in the early 1980s, recording onto VHS tapes that were reused weekly, had been manually turned off. Investigators interviewed Dale Pruitt, the custodian, in detail. Dale explained, somewhat defensively, that it was common practice to disable the security cameras during evening events to avoid filling the limited tape capacity with unnecessary footage. The school had only 3 tapes in rotation. If the cameras recorded every choir practice, every play rehearsal, every basketball game, the tapes would fill up within days and important footage would be overwritten. Dale said he had been eager to leave early that night. It was December 15th, his wife's birthday. He had made dinner reservations at a restaurant in the next town, a 40-minute drive. He had rushed through his closing duties, forgetting to turn the camera back on after the rehearsal ended. The absence of surveillance footage was devastating to the investigation. Detectives interviewed the other students who had attended the rehearsal. Most had left in groups or been picked up by parents between 8:35 p.m. and 8:50 p.m. Several students recalled seeing Lisa waiting near the rear entrance around 8:40 p.m. She was alone, sitting on a concrete bench under the yellow overhang, reading a paperback book, a science fiction novel, one student remembered, though they couldn't recall the title. One student, a girl named Melissa Torres, a sophomore who lived 3 streets away from Lisa, said she had waved to Lisa as her mother's car pulled away from the curb. Lisa had waved back, smiling. Melissa's statement was the last confirmed sighting of Lisa Jenkins. The problem investigators faced was the timeline. Between Melissa's sighting at approximately 8:45 p.m. and Marcus's arrival at 9:15 p.m., Lisa Jenkins vanished. 30 minutes. In those 30 minutes, in a small desert town where strangers are noticed immediately, where every vehicle is recognized, where the high school sits on an open stretch of road with clear sightlines in every direction. Lisa Jenkins disappeared without a trace. Search teams canvassed the area surrounding the high school. The terrain was brutal for systematic searching. Miles of open desert scattered with sagebrush, rocky outcrops, dry washes that flooded during rare rainstorms, and dirt roads crisscrossing the landscape, used by off-road vehicles, hunters, and ranchers moving livestock. The vastness of the environment, combined with the lack of natural landmarks, made grid searches nearly impossible. You could walk 50 feet in one direction and lose all sense of where you started. Cadaver dogs were brought in from Las Vegas, trained German shepherds capable of detecting human remains. But the extreme temperature fluctuations, scorching days in the 70s, freezing nights in the 30s, degraded scent trails rapidly. The dogs found nothing. Then, 3 days into the search, something unexpected surfaced. A deputy named Ramon Estes, conducting a roadside sweep along Highway 95, the main road leading out of Yucca Wells toward Las Vegas, found a small strand of metallic tinsel snagged on a broken fence post. The fence post was located approximately half a mile from the high school, on the western edge of town, near the highway's shoulder. The post was weathered, gray, splintered at the top where the wood had cracked and split over years of exposure. The tinsel was silver, roughly 6 inches long, frayed and torn at one end where it had been caught. The material was thin, cheap, the kind sold in bulk at party supply stores. Deputy Estes photographed the tinsel in place, then carefully removed it and bagged it as evidence. Investigators compared the tinsel to the decorations and props used in the Christmas pageant rehearsal. Mrs. Voss, the drama teacher, confirmed that the pageant set included tinsel, specifically silver tinsel used to decorate the cardboard Christmas tree on stage and to create icicle effects hanging from the rafters. The tinsel matched. Same color, same material, same manufacturer, identified by the distinctive texture and the way the metallic coating flaked when bent. It was the only physical clue in the entire case. Detectives theorized that Lisa may have accepted a ride from someone after Marcus failed to arrive on time. The tinsel could have been caught on Lisa's clothing or her backpack during the rehearsal, a small piece clinging to fabric unnoticed, and then blown out of a vehicle window as the car traveled along the highway, snagging on the fence post as it passed. But without surveillance footage, without early witness statements, without a clear timeline of Lisa's movements in the first critical minutes and hours after her disappearance, the theory was impossible to confirm or pursue. Investigators canvassed the highway, stopping at gas stations, truck stops, rest areas, asking if anyone had seen a 16-year-old girl, brown hair, wearing jeans and a red jacket. No one remembered seeing her. You might wonder how a delayed response could cripple an investigation so completely. The answer lies in the nature of evidence itself, particularly in a desert environment where preservation is nearly impossible. Physical traces degrade rapidly in the desert. Wind erodes footprints and tire tracks within hours, sometimes within minutes if the wind is strong enough. Temperature fluctuations, scorching days that bake the ground, freezing nights that create frost and then melt it, destroy scent trails that cadaver dogs and tracking dogs rely on. Dust and sand bury small pieces of evidence, fibers, hairs, fragments of clothing, making recovery nearly impossible without knowing exactly where to look. The first 48 hours after a disappearance are called the golden window in investigative terminology. It's the period when evidence is freshest, when witnesses' memories are sharpest, when the chances of recovery, alive or dead, are statistically highest. In Lisa Jenkins' case, that golden window was lost, not because of malice, not because of corruption or conspiracy, but because of a dispatcher's inexperience, a custodian's forgetfulness, and the brutal and different erasure of the desert wind. By the time the investigation was launched in earnest, the crime scene, if there ever was one, had been swept clean, blown away, scattered across miles of empty desert like the tinsel itself. Lisa Jenkins was declared a missing person. The case remains unsolved. Her family never received answers. The strand of tinsel, the The single piece of physical evidence linking Lisa to a location half a mile from where she was last seen was cataloged, photographed, and stored in an evidence locker at the Nye County Sheriff's Office, where it remains to this day, sealed in a clear plastic bag, labeled with a case number and a date. Forensic teams analyzed the tinsel exhaustively. They tested it for DNA, for fingerprints, for any trace material, skin cells, fibers, oils that might link it to a suspect or a vehicle. They found nothing. The tinsel could have come from Lisa's clothing, or it could have been discarded by anyone traveling that highway during the holiday season. Tossed from a car window, carried by the wind, landing on the fence post purely by chance. It was a clue that pointed nowhere. The investigation into Lisa Jenkins' disappearance is a textbook example of systemic failure. Not criminal negligence, not deliberate obstruction, but the quiet, bureaucratic collapse that occurs when human error, holiday understaffing, inadequate training, and the unforgiving nature of the environment converge at exactly the wrong moment. At this point, you're asking yourself, what really happened to Lisa Jenkins? The truth is, no one knows. The prevailing theory among investigators is abduction. Lisa likely accepted a ride from someone, either willingly, believing the person to be trustworthy, or under duress, coerced by threat or force, and was taken out of Yucca Wells, possibly toward Las Vegas, possibly into the vast empty desert where recovery is virtually impossible. But theories are not answers. Speculation is not closure. And the devastating reality is this: if the investigation had been launched immediately, if the security camera had been left on, if the dispatcher had recognized the urgency and followed proper protocol, Lisa Jenkins might have been found. Alive or dead, she might have been found. But those 48 hours were lost. And with them, any realistic chance of bringing her home. The high school in Yucca Wells still holds its annual Christmas pageant. The tradition continues. The rear entrance where Lisa waited is still used by students after evening events. But no one talks about December 15th, 1990. No memorial plaque. No moment of silence. No acknowledgement. Because the silence is easier than admitting the system failed. Easier than confronting the uncomfortable truth that a 16-year-old girl vanished. Because a phone call was misclassified. Because a camera was turned off. Because the wind erased the evidence before anyone thought to look. And somewhere, out there in the endless, unforgiving desert, beneath the sand or the scrub or the rocky outcrops, the answer to what happened to Lisa Jenkins is buried so deep, hidden so thoroughly, that it may never, ever be found. The Silent Night on the Fishing Vessel. Two Harbors, Minnesota. December 20th, 2012. Two Harbors is a small fishing port and shipping town on the western shore of Lake Superior, the largest and deepest of the Great Lakes, roughly 30 miles northeast of Duluth. Population, 3,600, swelling slightly in summer, with tourists drawn by the rocky coastline, the lighthouses, and the cold, pristine beauty of the lake. In winter, Two Harbors is harsh, brutal, dry, unforgiving. Lake Superior is a body of water that demands respect. Stretching over 31,000 square miles, with a maximum depth of over 1,200 feet and an average depth of nearly 500 feet, the lake is cold, unpredictable, and notoriously dangerous. Winter storms can generate waves over 20 feet high, capsizing vessels, snapping anchor chains, driving boats onto rocky shores. The water temperature in December hovers just above freezing, typically between 34 and 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Survival time in water that cold, even with a flotation device, is measured in minutes, not hours. Hypothermia sets in within 5 to 10 minutes. Loss of consciousness follows. Death is nearly certain within 15 to 30 minutes, depending on body mass, clothing, and physical condition. Michael Sorensen was 40 years old in December 2012, a third-generation commercial fisherman. His grandfather, Olaf Sorensen, had fished Lake Superior in the 1940s and 50s, working from wooden boats with hand-hauled nets. His father, Thomas Sorensen, had continued the tradition, through the 1970s and 80s, upgrading to steel-hulled trawlers with mechanized equipment. And Michael, despite the declining fish stocks, the rising costs of fuel and maintenance, and the economic challenges that had driven most small-scale commercial fishermen out of business, continued the family tradition. Michael owned a mid-sized trawler called the St. Nick, a 38-foot steel-hulled vessel built in 1987, equipped with basic navigation electronics, a VHF marine radio, radar, and a small enclosed cabin with a helm station, a bench seat, and a tiny galley area with a hot plate and a microwave. The boat was old, showing its age, but well-maintained. Michael took pride in that. He repaired what he could himself: engine work, welding, electrical systems, and only hired professionals when absolutely necessary. He lived in 2 harbors with his wife, Karen, a registered nurse who worked at the local clinic, and their 3 children: Emma, age 7, Jacob, age 9, and Sarah, age 12. The family was not wealthy. Money was always tight. Karen's income from the clinic provided stability: steady paychecks, health insurance, benefits. Michael's fishing brought in supplemental income during the productive months, spring through fall, when the lake was relatively calm and the fish populations migrated closer to shore. December was not a productive month. Most commercial fishermen in 2 harbors stayed docked in December. The weather was too dangerous. The fish populations migrated to deeper, colder water far from the coast. The ice began forming along the shoreline, making navigation treacherous. The risk far outweighed the potential reward. But December was also expensive. Christmas was coming. 3 children expecting gifts. A furnace that had broken down the previous week, requiring an emergency repair that cost $800 on a credit card they were already struggling to pay off. A truck that needed new tires before winter driving became impossible. On the morning of December 20th, 2012, Michael made a decision. He told Karen he was going out for a short run, just a few hours, staying close to shore, checking his nets one last time before the holiday, hoping to pull in enough whitefish or lake trout to sell and bring in a few $100s to ease the financial pressure. Karen argued against it. The forecast called for high winds, gusting up to 30 miles per hour, and dropping temperatures throughout the day. Michael's usual crew, 2 men who typically worked with him, Danny Larson and Pete Nygard, had both refused to go out, citing the dangerous conditions. Michael insisted. He said he'd be careful. He'd stay close to the harbor, within sight of land. He'd keep the VHF radio on, monitoring the weather channels. He'd be back by noon, well before the worst of the weather arrived. Karen relented, reluctantly. She knew Michael was experienced, careful, meticulous about safety. He had been fishing Lake Superior his entire adult life, over 20 years on the water. He knew the lake, respected its power, understood the risks. She kissed him goodbye at the door. The children were still asleep. Michael looked in on them before leaving. Emma curled up with her stuffed rabbit. Jacob sprawled across his bed with a book on his chest. Sarah buried under blankets, only the top of her head visible. He left the house at 8:15 a.m., driving the short distance to the harbor in his old pickup truck. At 8:40 a.m., the St. Nick departed 2 harbors, heading northeast along the coastline, the engine chugging steadily, the bow cutting through the dark, choppy water. Michael radioed the harbor master at 9:10 a.m., confirming his position, approximately 3 miles offshore, and his estimated return time of 11:30 a.m. The harbor master, a man named Carl Hendricks, noted the call in his log. That was the last communication anyone had with Michael Sorensen. At 12:30 p.m., when Michael had not returned, Karen called the harbor master's office. Carl tried to raise Michael on the VHF radio, calling repeatedly on channel 16, the standard hailing and distress frequency. No response. By 1 p.m., the U.S. Coast Guard station in Duluth had been notified. A search and rescue operation was launched immediately. A Coast Guard cutter, a helicopter, and volunteer boats from the harbor coordinating a search grid along the coastline. At 3:45 p.m., the St. Nick was located. The vessel was found idling against the docks in 2 harbors, tied to the same mooring cleat where Michael had departed that morning. The engine was running in neutral. The boat had somehow returned to port, either brought back by someone or drifting on autopilot, though the St. Nick had no autopilot system. Michael was gone. Coast Guard personnel and local sheriff's deputies boarded the vessel immediately, conducting a thorough search and documentation of the scene. What they found was chilling in its mundane, heartbreaking normalcy. The cabin was undisturbed. The helm station showed no signs of struggle or panic. The radio was on, tuned to the weather channel, volume low. On the small dashboard directly in front of the captain's seat sat a ceramic mug, white with a faded logo from a local bait shop. The mug was half filled with hot cocoa, the surface still faintly warm to the touch, a thin skin forming on top where the cocoa had begun to cool. Next to the mug, lying flat on the dashboard, was a cheap Christmas card, the kind sold in packs of 10 at drugstores. The card was handmade in the sense that it had been decorated by a child. The front featured crayon drawings, a green Christmas tree with a yellow star on top, a small fishing boat on blue waves, and 3 stick-figure children holding hands beneath the tree, their faces represented by circles with dots for eyes and curved lines for smile. The inside of the card was signed in a child's shaky handwriting, the letters large and uneven. To Daddy, come home safe. Love, Emma. Michael's automatic flotation suit, a bright orange, Coast Guard approved type I personal flotation device designed to inflate automatically upon contact with water, was missing from its usual storage hook inside the cabin. He had been wearing it. The deck of the St. Nick was covered in a thin layer of ice, formed from the spray kicked up by the waves and the dropping temperatures throughout the day. The metal railings were slick, treacherous. Investigators noted that the conditions would have made any movement on deck extremely hazardous, particularly for someone working alone. The fishing nets had been partially hauled in, draped over the side of the boat, still dripping with water. It appeared Michael had been in the process of checking the nets when something happened. The investigative conclusion was straightforward and consistent with the physical evidence. Michael Sorensen had been working on deck, hauling in the nets or adjusting equipment, when he slipped on the iced surface and fell overboard into the frigid water of Lake Superior. Despite wearing the automatic flotation suit, which would have inflated and kept his head above water, the extreme cold, the shock of immersion, the weight of his winter clothing soaked through with water, and the violent waves would have made self-rescue nearly impossible. Even with the flotation device, hypothermia would have set in within minutes. Loss of motor control, confusion, inability to swim or call for help, unconsciousness, death. D. The official ruling, documented in the Coast Guard report and the county medical examiner's file, was accidental death due to drowning and hypothermia. But Michael Sorensen's body was never recovered, and this is where the case transcends the realm of accident investigation and enters the territory of profound, unresolved grief. Lake Superior is not a forgiving body of water when it comes to the dead. The lake's immense depth, its cold temperatures, and the unique physics of deep freshwater create conditions where bodies rarely surface. In warmer, shallow water, drowned bodies typically resurface after several days due to the formation of gases during decomposition, primarily methane and hydrogen sulfide, that create buoyancy and cause the body to float. But in Lake Superior, especially in winter, the process is different. The water temperature is cold enough to drastically slow the decomposition process. Gas formation is inhibited. Without sufficient gas buildup, the body remains negatively buoyant. It sinks and stays submerged. Additionally, the immense pressure at depth, increasing by approximately 1 atmosphere, 14.7 pounds per square inch, for every 33 feet of depth, compresses the body and prevents the expansion of gases that would otherwise cause it to rise. In the deepest parts of Lake Superior, where the pressure exceeds 35 atmospheres, bodies can remain on the lake bed indefinitely, preserved by the cold, held down by the pressure, unreachable by any conventional recovery method. As a result, Lake Superior has claimed hundreds of lives over the centuries. Sailors, fishermen, swimmers, boaters, and the vast majority of those bodies have never been found. The lake is sometimes called the graveyard of the Great Lakes for this reason, and the saying among those who work the water is this: Lake Superior never gives up her dead. Michael Sorensen became one of those names, one of the lost, one of the unclaimed, one of the permanent residents of the cold, dark depths. The emotional weight of this case does not lie in mystery or foul play or investigative failure. There was no crime, no suspicious circumstances, no evidence of anything other than a tragic accident, a man doing dangerous work in dangerous conditions, a momentary slip, a fall into water that does not forgive mistakes. But the family was left with something far worse than uncertainty. They were left with certainty and the complete absence of closure. Karen Sorensen knew her husband was dead. The Coast Guard investigation confirmed it. The timeline, the conditions, the evidence, all of it pointed to the same inescapable conclusion. But there was no body to bury, no funeral service with a casket, no grave to visit, no headstone to place flowers beside, no physical place to mourn, just the knowledge that Michael was out there, somewhere beneath the surface of the lake, in the cold, silent depths, unreachable and unrecoverable. The case file contains one additional detail that underscores the quiet, suffocating horror of this disappearance, a detail that transforms a straightforward accidental death into something far more emotionally devastating. On Christmas morning, 2012, 5 days after Michael disappeared, his youngest daughter, Emma, age 7, the one who had made the card found on the St. Nick, asked her mother a question. Emma came downstairs in her pajamas, still half asleep, and saw the wrapped presents under the Christmas tree, fewer than usual, but still there because Karen had tried, desperately, to maintain some sense of normalcy for the children. Emma looked around the living room and asked, "Where's Daddy?" Karen, exhausted, red-eyed from days of crying, knelt down and tried to explain, as gently as she could, that Daddy wasn't coming home. Emma didn't understand. She asked, "Is he still on the boat?" Karen said no. Emma asked, "Is he at the hospital?" Karen said no. Emma, confused, frightened by her mother's tears, asked the question that Karen had no answer for. "Then where is he?" And Karen had nothing to say, because the truth, the unbearable, incomprehensible truth, was that Michael Sorensen was somewhere in Lake Superior, somewhere in the vast, dark expanse of cold water, and no one knew exactly where, and no one could bring him back, and he would never come home. At this point, you're asking yourself whether this is truly a case worth including in a documentary about Christmas horrors, whether an accidental drowning, tragic as it is, belongs alongside abductions and locked room mysteries and vanishings that defy explanation. But the horror here is not in the method of death. It's in the mundane, inevitable way that economic pressure, the desire to provide for a family during the holidays, and the brutal, unforgiving nature of the environment converged to take a father away from his children on December 20th, leaving them to face Christmas without. It's in the image of the half-filled mug of cocoa, still faintly warm, sitting on the dashboard of an empty boat. It's in the crayon-drawn Christmas card, signed by a 7-year-old who just wanted her father to come home safe. And it's in the knowledge that Michael Sorensen is still out there, still in the lake, still unreachable, still lost, while his family marks every Christmas without him, unable to visit a grave, unable to say a proper goodbye, unable to do anything except stand on the docks and look out at the cold, gray water and wonder where exactly he is. The St. Nick was sold by Karen in 2013. She couldn't afford to keep it. The maintenance costs, the slip fees, the insurance, it was too much. And more than that, she couldn't bear to look at it, couldn't bear the reminder of what the lake had taken. The family moved to Duluth the following year, seeking distance from two harbors, from the harbor, from the lake itself, from the constant visible reminder of loss. Emma, Jacob, and Sarah are adults now. Emma is 20, studying nursing like her mother. Jacob is 22, working in construction in Minneapolis. Sarah is 25, married, living in St. Paul. They rarely speak publicly about their father. They've given no interviews. They don't participate in memorial events or advocacy for fishing safety. But every December 20th, they return to two harbors. All three of them, together, no matter where they are or what they're doing. They drive to the harbor. They stand on the docks where the St. Nick once moored, where their father departed on his final trip. They look out at Lake Superior, the vast, dark expanse of water stretching to the horizon, cold and gray under the December sky, the waves crashing endlessly against the concrete piers, the wind cutting through their coats. And they leave a wreath. Not on a grave, because there is no grave. Not at a memorial, because there is no memorial. Just on the dock, where the water meets the land, where the cold wind howls off the lake, where their father stepped onto his boat one December morning and never came back. Because that's the only place they have. And that's the only goodbye they'll ever be able to say. This is the weight of Michael Sorensen's case. Not the mystery of how he died. The investigation answered that question clearly. But the unresolved, unending grief of a family forced to live with the certainty of loss and the complete absence of closure. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing is not the unknown. It's the known, the inescapable, irreversible truth that someone you love is gone forever. Taken by an environment does not return the dead, and there is no body, no grave, no final resting place to visit. Just the cold, silent depths of a lake that has swallowed them whole, and the knowledge that they will never, ever come home. 7 small towns, 7 Christmas nights, 7 people who vanished beneath the glow of holiday lights, leaving behind only questions, contradictions, and families still searching for answers. If you know something about any unsolved case, if a detail never sat right, if you've heard whispers that were never reported, speak up. Because silence protects only one thing: the unknown. These stories don't end because we finish telling them. They end when someone finally breaks the silence. Until then, we keep investigating. We keep asking. We keep searching for the truth hidden in plain sight. This is Plain Sight Docs. Subscribe. Share these stories. And remember, the answers are out there. Sometimes, they're just waiting for the right person to notice them. These are the horrors that shattered the silence.